Quigley in 5, underwater in the yellow lane.
Jess Carling of Great Britain.
Quigley goes through.
The silver to Jess Carling. Wonderful silver medal for Great Britain.
Welcome to the Honest Athletes podcast with
Lauren Quigley
and Jazz Carlin. Welcome back to the Honest Athletes podcast. We do really hope you are enjoying season 2 so far. On the Honest Athletes podcast, we are so passionate about making a difference to people's sporting journey and about sharing our own experiences to help others. And this week, we are both very excited to be talking to this guest. I worked with this guest during my swimming career, and I've been so amazed at the incredible work she is doing in elite sport, and in particular with female athletes. She's working with the Welsh Institute of Performance Science and leading the research with female athletes and the impact of the menstrual cycle on sport participation and performance. God, that was a mouthful. Welcome to the podcast, Dr Natalie Brown.
Thank you so much for having me. Well done trying to get out the Welsh Institute of Performance Science. It is such a mouthful.
Oh, no, thank you so much for coming on and even saying like doctor, obviously from working with you back in Swansea in the day, when I was competing and stuff, and you were heavily in the sports science world now, but the impact that you're having now on, I guess, all the research you're doing around that menstrual cycle and especially to help the female athletes in sport, it must be pretty interesting in all the things that you've been able to learn along the way. And I can't wait to, well, we both can't wait to ask you loads of questions about it.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's been really nice, actually. Like you said, Jazz, obviously I was working with you back in the day in Swansea when I was in sports science with Welsh swimming, and kind of have done my PhD since, and now very much focus on research around female athletes. And I'm really fortunate actually to do a job that I also absolutely love and kind of are really passionate about. So yeah, excited to talk to you about it today.
Oh, well, talking about the women's menstrual cycle can sometimes be seen as quite a taboo subject and not very easy to open up about. But I think the more we talk and give education about it, hopefully that can help future athletes that maybe are looking for more support. So Nat, how have you found people's perception of the menstrual cycle?
Yeah, it's really nice to see it starting to shift and starting to change. But when I first started working in this, kind of almost 3 years ago now, it was such a subject that wasn't discussed. When I spoke to female athletes, you know, they were kind of Commonwealth Olympic level athletes, and the majority were just like, no, I'd never talk to my coach about that. The flip side of that is coaches just were like, I felt awkward or uncomfortable, very much kind of created from almost society and perceptions within society. You know, you'll see like media and adverts like, oh, use our menstrual project because no one will know that you're on your menstrual cycle. And it's kind of really created this kind of secretive environment. And that's still the same within sport. But like I said, it's starting to change a little bit. It is becoming more of a topic that's discussed. But definitely words of awkwardness were just continually repeated from athletes and coaches when they were talking about the menstrual cycle.
Just quickly, thank you for coming on. Obviously, it's an important subject that we want to cover today. And it's great, like you've just said, that people are starting to talk about it a bit more, but talk about it enough? Probably not yet, but I know obviously you're working towards talking about it very openly. So I know when Jazz and I discussed this episode, we said that we want to talk about our own experiences because we've realised that's the best way we can connect. For me, I didn't have a period for 5 years during my career and just left it because I was like, great, don't have to deal with it. It's not a problem. I don't have to worry being in a costume, having to, oh, I'm on my period, to start it soon. I would love for you to just quickly to start off, touch on why an absent period is such a bad thing and the effects that can have on not just right then and there as an athlete, but later on in life as well.
Yeah, 100%. So if, for example, you're not taking any form of hormonal contraceptive and you don't have a period, because obviously hormonal contraceptives can be the reason you stop your period. But if you're not taking any and you don't have a period, and normally we say for more than 3 months, that's such an indicator of your health, but also the impact on your performance. So, for example, your period can commonly stop if you've your energy intake and your energy expenditure is not in balance. So basically, you're not putting enough fuel in your body for your body to be able to do just day-to-day looking after itself, being healthy, which can also have a huge impact long-term on like your bone health, your mood, so many different aspects. So it's not even, as you said, Lauren, not just like they're there in that moment when actually, yeah, this is great, I've not had a period. Actually, there's such a longer term implication from a health perspective of that. So yeah, we almost need to see periods as like a positive, that we're really lucky as females, we've got this extra sign that tells us we're really healthy, everything's functioning really well, and therefore we're probably able to perform at our best.
Yeah, so even I guess with Lauren, I have a very different experiences. And I think that's what's great about the both of us, is we've got very different experiences from a young age. And I think I started my period at 14, as quite an average age, I guess. And I think at a young age, it is quite embarrassing being able to, you don't really talk to your friends about it. Even your family, you can feel quite embarrassed. I think I spoke to my mum about it a bit. But even I remember back then, it felt like quite an uneasy subject to talk about. And I guess even with sport, and in particular swimming, it's being in a swimming costume and feeling, I guess, that insecurity of being on your period, not really knowing, it's quite new to you, it's a new experience. So that can be in itself quite daunting. Have you found, I guess, because I've done a lot of research also with UK sport about the dropout in swimming in particular with the girls a lot younger. Do you think there is, I guess, that correlation between the dropout and the menstrual cycles beginning and a lot of changes that are happening in your body in sport? Do you think there's like a correlation between them both?
Yeah, I think hugely there is. You know, two things you mentioned there was like your changes in your body. So all of a sudden, like girls can be just a bit like, not able to coordinate as well, or see their performances affected. But also, like you said, with your period, it's like something to all of a sudden manage. Like I know from my personal experience, I didn't want to stop sports. So it was something I was like, right, I'm just gonna have to find a way to manage this and work out how to use a tampon to be able to go swimming or whatever that might be. Whereas definitely for other girls, that's too much of a barrier, or they might not have access to menstrual products or be confident enough to try that. So actually it means that their other option is to stop participating in sport, or, you know, try a different sport that might be. So like you said, for example, with swimming, it is quite, you may feel quite exposed or having to deal with the element of being in the water. I mean, it would be interesting to see what your experiences were like with that, of kind of managing your period in the water. And obviously when I was working in swimming, there were always kind of instances where a girl would come on her period on poolside, and obviously blood combined with water, it looks so much worse than it is. But again, that experience can be previously seen as embarrassing because it's not something that's prepared for or talked about.
Yeah, so for me, and something I wanted to ask you was, I considered myself, again, very lucky because I started quite late, well, very late. I think I was about 15, 16. And so all of my friends had started, and I'd sort of learned from hearing them talk about it and stuff like that. And for me, with my mum, it wasn't taboo or awkward really at all. My mum was brilliant. She was just like, whenever you start, let me know, you know. And I think me being older obviously helped that as well. Explained what I needed to do and was like, off on your way. If you've got any problems, let me know. Because my friends had done it, like I say, I just sort of cracked on with it. But there were the girls that started earlier. I think it was a much bigger, I think maybe stumbling block for them in terms of, I remember one of my friends was like, I'm dying. And I was like, what? She was like, I've got blood, I'm dying. And I was like, no, I don't think you're dying. Let's just talk about it. Let's go and speak to someone who might know. I also remember being on a camp, and it's a funny story now. Hopefully the girl isn't too traumatized, but obviously when you're away from your parents and everything, and you really only have your teammates to rely on. And it was an England talent. We were quite young, and this girl started on a period, no parents, nothing. And so she came to the next room, which all the girls were in. She's like, I've started on my period. I don't know what to do. So she was in the toilet, and it was like we were all cheering her on for a race. And there was one person trying to explain to her what to do. And someone went, well, there's 2 holes. And then someone went, but I thought there was 3. And it was like this whole like comedy performance of us trying to support her through it, but not laughing, but, you know, and I think it was a good thing, to be honest, because she was fine and we sorted her out and everything. But everybody goes through such an individual experience with this, but everybody goes, well, all females obviously go through it. Being involved in sport from such a young age, does that normally delay you starting your period or come early, or is it literally just nothing to do with that?
Yeah, if you're, as I said, as we mentioned, around that kind of energy balance and making sure that you're having enough energy to be able to do the sport you're taking part in, then sport should not influence the stage and the age that you start your period. So that normally that range can be anything from 9 to 15 is what we'd say a normal range would be. So if you're over 15, that's when we're maybe saying, you know, it's good to go and seek medical advice because you might be underlying condition, or again, you might just not have that balance right with your sport and actually what your body needs to be able to start your period and go through puberty and all the other adaptations that happen. But yeah, it's that normal range is kind of like anything from young as 8 or 9 up to 15, which again, like you said, Lauren, is a huge difference. You know, when you're 14, 15, you might be able to manage that much better than, you know, when you're 8 or 9 trying to deal with bleeding and how that affects you in sport and what's going on.
And I remember from a young age, actually, even with Lauren saying with some of the younger girls, I remember at school, I don't know why, some of the boys in the class were going through the girls' bags looking for tampons. And I think they looked in my bag and they'd found nothing because I hadn't actually started my period. But I guess it's kind of like been a bit shamed at times from like at school and people wanting to know, and it's kind of seen as quite a shameful thing. Whereas I guess what we want to do is be able to make it normal. It's just something that we can be able to talk about. It gets easier the more you talk about it. But even from a younger age, I remember, I guess, the changes that had happened to my body. My chest got bigger. I guess, as you say, you're growing and all the hormonal changes. I remember being quite moody. I guess you start to be a bit snappy maybe with parents. You're not quite around that time of the month, a bit moodier, a bit more tired maybe. But can you just...
You can't blame that for being moody.
Oh, no. But can you, I guess, Nat, can you talk us through, I guess, maybe the symptoms or side effects and things that can come with coming on your period, I guess, from a younger age, but also a lot of the symptoms can happen throughout your life until you stop your periods, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So when you start your period, normally like the first maybe 2 years can be really varied, and actually symptoms can be way worse. So those kind of mood changes are really common, feeling like really agitated and irritable, you know, affecting your skin, but also physically. So actually it's really common to have really heavy bleeding when you first start your period, and actually that can settle down. But generally be a couple of years, you kind of settle into more of a pattern, and everyone will have a different experience of their symptoms. So one person might be like, no, I'm absolutely fine. I might just get really minor cramps a couple of days before or the first day of my period. Whereas other people will have a whole host of symptoms that affects them. Generally, the more negative symptoms are the week before and maybe the first couple of days of your period. So we've already mentioned a few, but things like bloating, changes in mood, stomach cramps are common, back pain, headaches, all those sorts of things are really common, definitely that week before. But also I always like to kind of highlight that actually at different times of your menstrual cycle, you can have some really positive symptoms. So normally kind of the week after you've just had your period, you might actually feel really strong, really confident, have loads of energy, be super motivated, So again, it's not always, there is again that perception that sometimes the menstrual cycle is just really negative because, obviously having cramps and feeling moody or not having any, really low energy levels is another one. Obviously like pretty annoying or frustrating. But at the same time, it's also highlighting the flip of that, certain times you might also be like really focused or be able to multitask really well. So it's, for me, really important to highlight those as well.
That's great for you to say that, because again, there's a lot of negative connotations around having a period, and you start your period in a week. Or I've got friends who, they'll call me up and they'll be crying. I'll go, "When are you due on?" And it's like, it's always the negative side of it. So it's good to hear positives, from it as well, because not many people talk about those. I always want to talk about the absent period because I experienced so long with it. And it was only because the coach that I had at the time had gone to a coaching conference, and he came back and he was just like, "I'm so sorry." And I was like, "Sorry, what? And he was like, I didn't realize the importance of having a period." And I think as a male coach, he felt like he'd let me down, because he said, really, we should have first and foremost tried to get them back because of not only how you are now, but later in life. And it was just really important for that. But the factors that can cause absent periods, I have been taught or have been told that there's lots of things that can affect this. And I know you've said about energy input versus energy output, but I was wondering, and I could be completely wrong, if things like stress, your diet, training, all these things can affect it, or just one of those things. Because for me, when I lost my period, when I've looked back and reflected back, it was at a time when I was really stressed. A lot of negative things were happening in my life at the time, and diet had changed and all sorts. So I was wondering what the factors are that can cause this.
Yeah, so definitely additional factors can affect whether you have your period and also how regular your period is. So although you might not lose it completely, it might mean that all of a sudden you don't have a regular period, which a textbook would be 28 days. But that can vary anything from like 21 to 35 days. But actually, the things that you've just commented there, so diet, stress is a huge one. That can cause periods to be really irregular. And as you said, also to stop. So kind of external stress, so things like school, exams, like loads of different factors that cause that external stress. Sleep's another one. And travel. So for example, if, as athletes traveling around to different countries for different competitions, that can actually really affect your period and whether it's regular or if you miss that. Diet's another big one. I think they're probably the really key predominant ones that would affect periods and whether you miss them. And then kind of like how that all relates together. So for example, if you've had a poor diet and you're really stressed and you're doing loads and loads of training, it all obviously accumulates more and more and more to have so it might go from just having an irregular period to then it's stopping altogether. If those external factors aren't kind of controlled or I suppose managed really. I really want to ask Lauren, how did you get your period back? What did you do, or how did you approach that?
It's really funny actually. The day that I decided to finish with swimming and was done, and sort of took that step away from the sport and the pressures of it and the environment I was in at one point, I actually said to my mum, I said, I feel completely different. I feel like a massive weight has been lifted off my shoulders. And I actually said to her, I think I will start my period will come back, just from the way I felt. I just felt completely different. It was unbelievable, the switch in just the decision to sort of step away from competing in Great Britain and all that sort of stuff and get away from, like I say, the environment I was in. That stress just lifted and I felt a lot more relaxed, and it just came back. It did just come back, which was obviously absolutely amazing. But it's to me, it was like, wow, stress for me was I believe, a massive part as to why I'd lost my period for so long.
Now, does it actually make a difference? So one of my closest friends actually, obviously not naming names, but whenever like something like a big event or something comes along, it seems like a period comes like the day before or like on that day when she's got something that I guess that she'd been aiming for a set. Is there anything to do with that, or is that literally just chance, or is it, I guess, your body, whether it's relaxed or whatever, it's got that? I don't know.
No, sometimes it can be, because actually quite a lot of girls I've worked with in the past have come on their period when they're at their like first major competition. So that time, so for some people that stress maybe like lower and it actually stops your period, whereas for others it actually can be something that sometimes it is just pure coincidence, but others it's kind of like a factor that's influencing that. And again, that's when it's completely individual. So again, for some people, stress won't have any effect on their periods, whereas for others, like I know for me, it definitely affects mine. So, I'm working in this area and researching it, and sometimes I still don't get it right. And I'm like, okay, my period's really late now. And actually, when I've looked back on when I've been like monitoring that and tracking that, is because actually I've had a period of being really stressed with work. And that's kind of my factor that affects it, whereas for others it's completely different.
And I guess going through it, is there anything you can do to either support your period, either in training or at a competition? Is there anything you can work on? I guess the nutrition side of it, hydration, sleep, rest. Are those other factors that you can do that can help support it? Because I guess your body's going through a lot of changes and adaptation. So do you need to look after your body even more during this time?
I always definitely say like that pre-menstrual phase, whatever you do normally, rest, recovery, sleep, diet, that's the time you almost need to do that even better. Does that make sense? You need to be like completely on it then to really try and help manage those symptoms. So if you're feeling like, one thing to start off with is to monitor or track your menstrual cycle. So you really get used to your own cycle and what symptoms you experience. And then you know how to manage those. So for example, if you're someone that gets really low in energy levels the week before, actually know that sleep, you need to make sure you're completely on it with your sleep and think about what nutrition you have so that you can maybe have that extra fuel to manage those sessions compared to the rest of the month. So I always say, first of all, work out what your symptoms are. Flip side of that might be if you get really moody or agitated, is that because you just need a little bit of time for yourself? So do you need to put aside half an hour to read a book or have a relaxing bath or go for a walk so that you can manage that, so it's not something that then affects you? You can actually be really proactive with it.
Something you touched on right at the start was when I mentioned not having a period for 5 years, was obviously the pill and stuff like that can affect those things. And for me, that wasn't what affected it. But for a lot of people, it was. And I have a really good friend who was involved in sport and went on the pill, but was put on the pill it almost masked the problem rather than sorted it out. And that's a big no-no. Just put them on the pill and hopefully they'll be sorted out later on. But again, going back to my friend, she has spoken to me openly about struggling with putting on weight after coming off and trying to sort it out. Because I know obviously weight has a big link to your periods and your menstrual cycle, but she worries about putting loads of weight on, but also doesn't want to restrict and lose her period at the same time. What advice could you give for that? It's like a catch-22 sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's like so many factors, isn't it, that influence it. One thing that is always linked with weight around the menstrual cycle is also how that links with bloating. And one simple tip I always give around that is actually to stay hydrated, because one thing we always feel when we're bloated is you always feel like you don't want to take anything else on, but actually being hydrated helps to reduce how bloated you are. So that's like my one quick little tip for anyone, is to have some, I was going to say both of you just take a drink at the same time there. To just stay hydrated if you're feeling bloated, because that can actually, it's something we You feel the opposite of what you want to do, but actually can really help. And again, the other thing around that, I don't want to keep repeating it, but actually monitoring to see how much weight you put on, it can actually be really useful, because sometimes we actually just feel heavier and we're not. And that's, again, because of that bloating effect for that individual. So see, what weight you put on, and then you can actually then really control maybe diet around that and fuel, so that you don't restrict that. You're making sure you're getting plenty of fuel in, but you also know your weight. And that's, I suppose, something I've worked on when I've worked in sports that require you to make weight. So like boxing or judo, when they've actually got to weigh in weightlifting, actually being able to manage that. So all of a sudden it's not a stress. Because again, sometimes that can make it even worse. If you're not aware, you might normally put on, doesn't sound a lot, but a kilo every single month around that same time. And you're going to weigh in at that time. It's not something that you're then stressed and just stop eating to try and reduce that. You're aware of it, and then you can really manage it. So I suppose, again, it's like reiterating that awareness, and then being able to work out what works for you. And, look for some advice of how you might be able to manage that. Contraceptives are another, sometimes they are used to help manage weight or manage symptoms. But again, the flip side of those are sometimes it causes way worse symptoms. That might mean that that's not the right contraceptive for you. So maybe a different option to try. And again, Lauren, I definitely want to pick up on that, how it masks things. So it's like, oh, great, especially like, for example, the combined pill that you have that 7-day break. You're like, oh, it's okay, I'm having my period every month because you're having that 7-day. But that's actually not a period, it's what we call a withdrawal bleed. So again, that's why it masks, because you don't actually know if your body's able to have a natural period. So I think I've answered a million questions and gone off on a tangent as well.
I tell you what, I am loving chatting to you, Nat. Like, I guess sharing both our stories, but I just know how important and how great this is going to be for so many athletes, and not just from the swimming side, from all sports, and how much we can actually talk about it and addressing those things. I'm just absolutely loving it. So I wanted to say that. But for me, I guess different to Lauren, at the age of 16, I decided to go on the pill, and mine was for sporting reasons. And I found, I guess, managing it, I found it easier to be able to, I guess, track when competitions were, and I could plan when I was having the withdrawal bleed. And I had that all the way through my career. I did actually try one different pill that I was recommended, and I turned so moody, I was emotional, I was sensitive, so I quickly went back to the one I'd started on.
Again, Jazz, you can't just keep blaming it.
No, we've heard all the symptoms, and that's what
I'm kidding.
Yeah, so, and that was something that I found for me, I guess, was easier to manage. But I guess for me, it felt like it was having an impact, or that I wanted to plan it around training and around competitions. How much of an impact does it make around training and competitions? Is it something that you can train like normal, the competitions aren't affected, or are you better? How does it impact on both training and performance now?
It's definitely something that within the literature at the moment, like within research, is really, we're not 100% of. So actually, there's no solid evidence to say, yes, it really affects one type of like training or performance, but definitely more from the perceptions and experiences. So when I worked with, I spoke to a lot of female athletes about their menstrual cycle and if it affected them. And, the response was so varied, but definitely an impact on training if they felt lower on motivation or didn't have those energy levels, felt really low in energy. That can obviously affect training quite a lot. Competition was slightly different, that it was really hard, that it did, sometimes it does affect performance, and we've definitely seen it affect performance, whether that's actually through, times that they complete, or even just like how it makes them feel. But there was definitely a difference. And again, I would be interested to see what you two think. Is at competition, there's this like the adrenaline's there and almost that more kind of motivation to perform that really helps within, at competition. But it'd be interesting to see how you felt within training and competition on those two.
Yeah, I guess my experience is slightly different from being on the pill. Most of the time, I would be having my pill right through the competition. But sometimes you do, I guess, get a bleed midway through your pill and you can't help it. And I think, I guess the more we kind of normalize it, and I guess it's not getting on with it at all, but it being accepting that that's just how it is. And I guess the mindset of it is trying to think that this is just something that I have to do every month, or, how often your cycle is. But for me, it was something, I guess I used to take the pill, so I didn't really have those experiences of being on my week off or whatever during competitions. I tried to avoid that. And I don't know whether that was just something that I didn't really want to think. I think it was probably I just didn't want to think about while I had a lot of other things going on during a competition. I think it was more so that mindset, that it was just something less to worry about. I guess at a competition, there are so many different things going on. But Lauren, I guess, will have a very different experience to me too. So it'll be interesting to hear hers.
Yeah, for me, again, because I had so long without it, I sort of forgot what it was like, to be honest. I don't know if you still, and this is something you can answer for me, even though I did have an absent period, will I have still gone through some sort of cycle, or was it just like that was it? It was gone. Just before you answer that, my experience, I can't really remember because it feels like so long ago when I raced having a period. But what I do remember is just sort of getting on with it. I don't know. Again, with it not being talked about a lot, the atmosphere I was in terms of a training, I was really lucky that we had a team where you just get on with it, is probably a good and a bad thing. But so I just sort of cracked on, like Jazz said. This is all part of being a female. Get on with it. Get into the pool, train. I never really remember it affecting me too much. And also I feel quite lucky that if I remember correctly, I didn't really have too many bad side effects either with it. I was never, bent over with stomach cramps or anything like that. So since having them back, I'm an emotional wreck. Put any advert on, whatever, like I'll get upset and I'm like, Mom, I'm having a really bad day. And she's like, you're not, you're due on soon, aren't you? I'm like, oh yeah, check the app. Yeah, I'm due on soon. But yeah, I can't really remember too much. But also, again, I think I was quite lucky with the side effects that I had. But yeah, in terms of me not having one, will I have still gone through that cycle or?
No, you wouldn't have had a cycle. So basically what causes the cycle is hormone levels going up and down and how they fluctuate. And so estrogen and progesterone, how that causes, I feel like I'm about to do a little biology lesson, how when estrogen starts to increase, how that basically gets an egg ready to be released. And then when that's released, how then progesterone starts to then create your uterus lining, basically ready for fertilization. So if you're then pregnant, and if that doesn't happen, how it all then sheds, and then that's what your bleed is. But if you've, if you're not having those kind of, and it's the changes in hormones that cause different symptoms. So if you're not having those kind of changes in hormone levels, then and not having a cycle, then you're basically without a cycle, which is similar to what a hormonal contraceptive does. It basically flatlines your hormone levels. But that's why some people respond really differently. And to different types of hormones, contraceptives, people respond differently. So for example, I was on a combined pill and then I changed to another one, and I can only describe it as I turned into a Fruit Loop. That things like spilling milk in the morning when I was having my breakfast would mean that I just sob on the kitchen floor, I can't cope with this. So it's just really, really varied how you respond to those different hormone levels. But yeah, you would have had no cycle. It would have just been kind of no fluctuations. So
I can just totally relate to that milk spilling. I just remember, I guess, when I changed to a different pill, how emotional and sensitive I was, crying all the time. I was so upset. But even reading like your research papers, Nat, and saying like 48% of girls feel embarrassed by their periods. And I guess even looking back from a sporting perspective, I don't remember ever speaking to my coaches about it. I guess at times I would be quite sensitive, emotional, fairly mood change. So I guess without being able to tell your coach or things like that, with your cycle and things going on, you can't really expect them to know. But it was great to obviously hear Lauren saying that one of her coaches had come back and said he'd been on and learnt about it and he couldn't believe how important it was. How have you found, I guess, the relationship between athlete and coach? Do you feel like they're able to talk to their coaches? Does it differ between male and female? How have you found that kind of relationship between talking to coaches about your periods?
It's definitely been really varied. And one of the key things that came out from talking to a lot of the female athletes was actually they felt they wanted their coaches to have more education, because they felt they didn't talk to them because they didn't think they understood. And it's actually something that that's like the main area of my work now, is providing coach education and looking at if that's making a difference, and really helping, how to start a conversation with a young female that's trying to manage puberty, school, stress, starting their period, things like that. But it was really varied, actually. Some girls definitely were just like, if it was affecting me, I would talk to my coach. Whereas others were just like, I just never, ever want to have that conversation with my coach. Like, I don't even want to talk to my boyfriend about it. So why would I talk to my coach? So it's definitely was really varied in that. And I think just one of the key things is really to start changing that. And that's hopefully a lot of the work I'm doing is focused around actually how we open up conversations and it's like a normal biological process. We talk about within sport, they'd happily talk around heart rate or things like that. And actually it should just be the same. But it's kind of changing those perceptions. So yeah, definitely it's really varied. Generally females, and again, this is generalization, felt more comfortable talking to other females, so other female coaches. But even in some situations, they just generally were just like, I don't want to tell my coach whether it was male or female, because they were worried it was going to be like seen as a weakness or a reason not to be picked or selected for a team. Or so yeah, in some instances it was that real just keeping it a secret, so that perception wasn't there.
Well, first of all, it's amazing what you're doing. Obviously it needs to be done, and I'm glad that you're doing it. That's fantastic. And like going back to what Jazz said earlier, halfway through the podcast, that she's really enjoying the podcast. I am as well, and learning lots, and I think it's brilliant, and hopefully our listeners they will be getting lots out of it. In swimming, I can talk for that it's a really high percentage of male to female coaches, and so it is really important, I think, that all coaches, like you've just said, need to get that education, as well as the athletes and stuff like that. So it's brilliant that you're doing that. And again, it's such an individual thing. Everybody starts it differently, has different symptoms. It's so individual and so important that everyone is felt supported, which is not an easy thing to do. And getting that right can be difficult, but it is about that education. So thank you for doing that. And it's great that you love it. So that works hand in hand. I wanted to ask, what are the most common questions, queries, misconceptions that you get asked or you've ever heard that you would like to squash right here on the Honest Athletes podcast?
Definitely one we've touched on a lot is, and I just can't emphasize the importance of actually having a period is super important. It's super important for health, but also performance. So definitely, as you said, the convenience of not bleeding can be seen as something that's really attractive, but actually having a period is really important. So that's definitely one thing. Other things that are commonly asked, menstrual products, what menstrual products to use, and how many people don't know about menstrual cups. Always like, amazes me, because for me they're just amazing. You can do like anything in them. You can use them for swimming, way more comfortable than tampons, way more comfortable for running. That was one thing I found, because when I was swimming, I used to find using tampons was fine, but when I started running, I was just like, this is the most uncomfortable thing in the world. But also did not like using pads or anything. So yeah, menstrual cups are definitely one thing that I'd like to bring up and use alongside.
Just to jump in there now, because if people are listening, they don't know what a menstrual cup is. Could you explain what it is, the difference between that and a tampon? What's the...
Yeah, so I suppose the simplest thing is it is like a silicone cup that you can put inside that collects the blood that you can then remove, empty it out, clean it and put it back in. But you can wear that for like 12 hours. And then there's also different sizes. So for different people, whether they're, not just one thing that a lot of people associate is whether like before and after pregnancy, what size cup you need, but also how long they are. So people have their cervix is like higher or lower. So it's like shorter and longer cups. So there's so many different options to make them more comfortable. But actually they're really easy. And there's loads of videos as well now, like how to use them, how to put them in. So it's definitely becoming more popular and more aware. But yeah, I think they're definitely great in sport, along with like period pants as well. That's definitely something I think is becoming, they're not absolutely huge, massive, uncomfortable underwear anymore. They're like just like normal now. So that's another thing that would be really good in sport.
It's amazing because even last year, it was the first time I'd heard about the menstrual cups. And so my friend was just raving about them and said how great they were. And she's into sport. She absolutely loves it. And it was obviously the first time I'd heard about it. So I guess the more people find out, again, is the more we talk about it, the more we listen, learn, educate ourselves and our families being able to learn about it too. I think that's what makes the biggest difference. And even being able to talk about it, I guess when I was younger, it wasn't something necessarily that I was very comfortable talking about or open about. Whereas now talking to my friends, it's kind of like that conversation, like, what did you have for lunch? It's like, oh, you're talking about I've got a bit of cramps today, or I'm not feeling that well, those kind of things. So I think the older I've got, the easier it's become about talking. But I think the more I wish I'd maybe opened up and told my coaches, told my family if I wasn't feeling great, the cramps, I used to get them quite a lot. And even having the resources. But now, if someone came to you, I guess at any age, and they were maybe struggling with periods or wanted a bit of help, maybe tools and resources to get some support, what advice would you give them if they were struggling with their periods in sport?
Yeah, I think definitely the first thing is, I know like I've said it already, but kind of get to know what symptoms. So get to know you. So actually, what are your symptoms and what do you experience? Because then it's easier to work out maybe what you might do to manage that. So because there are so many symptoms that you might experience, it can almost feel a bit of like where do I start with this? How can I deal with it? So if you start to understand yourself and what symptoms you experience, it's then much more manageable to think about how you might be able to help that or reduce that within sport. So, like we've mentioned a few different things, but actually, if you're really struggling with, you might feel more sore, have more muscle soreness. So actually, what recovery strategies do you normally do? How can you really help your recovery? Or you feel more tired or have lower energy. So actually, okay, I'm going to focus on my sleep and what I'm eating so I feel less tired and more energy. So again, I think within sport, it's working out what your symptoms feel and how they're impacting that aspect of your sport to then be able to look at what thing you might want to manage more of. And different symptoms to do that. And hopefully there's more and more information that is coming out now that you can kind of learn more about the menstrual cycle and symptoms. So there's like different apps now and to help you monitor them, but also provide different information. So yeah, it's definitely becoming more common. There's still so far to go. I think so. Actually, that's one bit of work I've been doing recently, is actually looking at what menstrual education is like in school. So actually, what education do we get in school? Because I know myself and a few others were just like, I remember literally just having this hour like lesson where it was just the girls, all the boys got like shuffled off to a different room, and you literally got given a pad and been like, you're going to have your period at some point, and here's a pad that you might want to use. And that's about the extent all through biology of, you know, what happens from a reproductive point of view, but rather than actually like, this is some experiences you might have, or here's some symptoms and here's ways to manage it. So that's kind of one bit of work that hopefully will have like a wider impact to also then keep more girls within sport as well.
That's crazy. And from you just saying what education do people get in school, I'm thinking now, and I don't know about you, Jazz, I don't actually remember having a lesson on it. And maybe, I mean, I wasn't the best attendee at school, so that might be why. But I honestly don't. Jazz, did you have any education in that at school?
I feel like there's a subject, PSHE or something like that. I think that was it. And I feel like we might have had a lesson, maybe two. I'm not sure, but I don't remember it vividly. And I don't even remember it was like something that necessarily helped. It was just them telling us this is going to happen to you. I don't remember there being that much support out there. And I guess for me, it was like maybe talking to my mum about it. But even then I was like a bit nervous to be able to actually talk to someone about it. And you can feel quite alone. And I think that's probably what a lot of girls feel like going through this, that they feel alone, whereas really we all go through it and we've all gone through all the changes. So I think that's the most important thing to do, and to, I guess, pick the right people to talk to about it as well. The ones you trust and feel like you can open up to.
Nat, at what age do you think it's good to start off that education process? Do you think it's good to wait till they start and then go, you're not dying, by the way, it's fine? Or do you think, obviously, it needs to be introduced a bit earlier, but then how early?
Yeah, I think just starting it earlier. So, you know, even that kind of what we'd associate as primary school. So maybe as young, you know, we said you might start your periods when you're 9. That's the kind of earliest maybe, but actually starting to just introduce the fact that you're going to have your period and what that means. And obviously, potentially as you get a bit older, like having different conversations. But I think what for me to avoid is exactly what you've said, is literally a girl being like, I'm bleeding, I'm dying. Just trying to, you know, overcome that and try and reduce that, and, you know, support of who you can talk to, or support that, you know, within, you know, your teammates, that you know that you can all look out for each other, things like that, just so that, you know, you start becoming aware of it. And it's also not something that you're then so worried about talking to anyone about when it does happen, because it's actually just become something really normal that we just discuss, and as part of education and part of sport as well.
Yeah, and I think even now I've got one on my phone, like an app where you can track it, and even you can track, I guess, when your last period was, how often your cycles are, and what symptoms. You can click what symptoms you have. So even going back to what you said about it depends solely on, I guess, what symptoms you get. Everyone's so different. Whereas you can get apps these days that are so handy and helpful that you can just have on your phone. It's easy to put in. Is there anything else, Nat, I guess, from that side of it? Obviously, I said about the apps, and even then it can give you a few recommendations, I think, maybe. But are there any other recommendations in terms of that to keep track? I guess you can write them down, your symptoms and things like that.
Yeah,
come on, Nat, what's the best app?
I think whatever works best for you regarding monitoring it. So for me, I like using an app, and I actually really like Clue, just because it's like really just quite simple. You can just put in like, yeah, when you're on your period, any symptoms, and it's like just quite nice and easy to use. Whereas there's other apps that different people prefer because there's loads more information they get. So like Fit a Woman app, there's like loads of information on that. Whereas for others, especially if they've got like a training diary, sometimes they just like putting like a star or making a note within their day-to-day training. Within sport, Garmin also do have an app. And so that can like sync quite nicely with like all your other kind of training activities. So you can like have it all together in one place. So yeah, they're kind of probably my most commonly shared apps. But yeah, other than that, just like pen and paper, jotting it down, put it on a calendar if you don't like to use technology. Yeah, whatever works best for you. That has to be what you feel comfortable doing.
It's so funny you brought up the apps, because now I think as I've got older, everyone's like, what period app have you got? And I'm like, oh, I've got Clue. And they're like, oh, Clue. No, you got to go with this one. It's like a whole conversation now about who's got the best period app. But like you say, there's loads out there, and it is great that it's becoming more open and honest about how, you know, everyone's symptoms and stuff like that, and talking about it more openly. Is there anything else, Nat, that you think would be good for us to touch on, or anything else that you'd like to talk about a bit more?
I think just like, trying to use your app, get to know yourself, and then being able to use that to speak to your coach is probably my kind of simplest, straightforward conclusion of around the menstrual cycle. It's not something we should be embarrassed or ashamed about, but also to be aware of, because it can affect, you know, not just training and competition, but day-to-day life, and, you know, struggling with really severe cramps. And a lot of girls, especially younger, so definitely with age, I think we get more confident talking about it or just knowing what's going on, whereas especially when we're younger, we maybe don't know and try and muddle through, and actually that's when support would be really helpful. So rather than going up and saying to your coach, oh, I've got a bad stomach this month, actually just saying I've got period cramps, like the difference between those two things, and all of a sudden your coach can actually help you, because at the same time your coach can't do anything if they don't know. So actually, if they just think you've got a bad stomach, then they're not going to actively do anything to support you. Whereas if they know that you're struggling with period cramps, then they might be able to say, okay, yeah, the next couple of days, if you're really struggling, then we can do this in training, or, you know, we can focus on a different aspect of training, rather than the coach being unknown and the athlete struggling. It can just really help kind of partner those two up, I suppose.
Yeah. And that makes total sense, and being able to be open and honest about it, and how much your coach can actually, I guess, when they know, whereas sometimes I've been guilty of expecting them to be mind readers, and think, oh, they should know how I feel. Whereas really we've got to actually be open and be able to try and be honest about it. And sometimes those most difficult conversations can actually feel like the weight's been lifted, because you can actually talk to someone about it. But just one last question, Nat, because I know we've been talking to you for a while and I've absolutely loved it. But I guess in terms of training for those athletes that are maybe thinking they may be having a heavier period or struggling with cramps and the symptoms, should training be altered? Or sometimes I used to find that training would actually relieve a few cramps and things like that. I don't know whether that's actually any science behind that or whether it's in my head. But is there anything, I guess, that you should alter around your training in terms of when you're going through period or some of those symptoms?
So first answer to your question is yes, physical activity can reduce cramps. But sometimes you might not want to do that kind of maximal effort training session when you've got that. So it might be, you know, doing some light exercise can really help. But it might also, you might get more out of a session if you do alter it. So for example, if you have got, you know, really heavy cramps, really bad cramps, for example, actually maybe focusing on some skill work or doing some mobility or doing some yoga, you know, those sorts of, you're still really active, still really important, that can help reduce cramps, but maybe you get more out of a session rather than fighting against it and really struggling. I think, there is a combination between sometimes you don't want to do a session, and actually once you get started, it's sometimes the best session you ever do. So it definitely can be hard to get started sometimes, but knowing when actually, you know, just being a little bit, just maybe not such a high intense session or so maximal, but still trying to just adjust that and do something else that's equally as important within your training performance can be really worthwhile.
Wow, I tell you what, I have absolutely loved this. And I think the more we talk and the more we can actually listen and learn and become, it's just part of the normal. It's what we all go through. I think the easier it's going to be for athletes coming through, for everyone really. And I think, especially for those in sport, I think this podcast is going to be so useful. And I think from myself and Lauren, obviously, we would love to be able to help as many people. So if you do have any questions for us, or if you do want to be able to speak to someone, whatever you say to us is completely confidential and we're there for you. I guess, Nat, from your end, is there any resources or social media handles that people can look out for to get more advice or support from your end?
Yeah, so I suppose I've kind of got my Optimal Period page on Instagram, which I just try and share information about the menstrual cycle, and that's kind of in relation to sport. So that's definitely one. And then through there's kind of loads of other links for different people that are sharing information generally about the menstrual cycle and periods, but also specifically within sports. That's probably a good one to start with.
Well, thanks for coming on, Nat. I know you and Jazz have worked together before. This is the first time we've ever spoken, and it's been just brilliant. I've loved it. And I think, again, thank you for what you're doing. I know it's your job, but it's people like you that will make a huge difference within sport, and differences that need to happen, changes that really do need to happen. So we appreciate you, Nat, and appreciate you coming on today and talking about it. Because again, like I said, this is a really important topic that people and athletes need to be more open about, and so we couldn't have done it just us two, I don't think. So it's been great to have you on, and I know I have, and I know probably Jazz has learned a lot as well from this podcast. So yeah, thank you for that.
Again, just as he said, if there's ever anyone that wants to be able to talk, obviously it's completely confidential with us, or if they just want to be able to talk to us or anything, send us a message at The Honest Athletes or on our individual social media. But thank you so much, Nat. Obviously, I know we've worked together in the past, but the work that you're doing and how important it is for so many people and how much of a difference it can make is just unbelievable. I've loved listening to you, and as Lauren said, she has too. So I know our listeners will find it so useful, and I hope that it can actually just be able to make a difference. So thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for having me, but also for, you've actually asked me to come on and opened up the conversation around periods in the menstrual cycle. So I think thank you to both of you as well for kind of providing that opportunity for others to listen and learn more about it. Well, thank you so much, Nat, for joining us, but also for everyone listening to this episode of the Honest Athletes podcast. Again, as I said at the start, we want to be able to help and make a difference to people in sport and to really support people in their fitness and sporting journeys. So we really hope you've got something from this episode. Again, if you have any questions, just get in touch. But look out for a new episode every Wednesday. If you can, give us a rating of 5 stars if you enjoy it, and give us a thumbs up on YouTube. But we've really enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you next week.